Hi, everybody. It's Bob Ost. Welcome. It's Friday, October 17th. Yay. I got it right. I get the date wrong like every week. It's my trademark. But today it's October 17th, and glad to have you all here at the TRU Community Gathering. For those of you out in YouTube land who are randomly finding us or intentionally finding us, I want to let you know who we are. TRU is an arts services organization that I founded with Gary Hughes and Cheryl Davis 33 and a half years ago, almost 34 years ago. We are sort of dedicated to helping people understand and navigate the business of theater. And we have a special interest in helping and supporting producers. But we actually, at this point, 34 years later, we do a lot more than help producers. We help writers, we help artists, we help just about anybody in the business who wants to be helped. So hopefully you'll find us helpful for you as well. We are doing this because it was started off as a community service. Does everybody remember COVID? Everybody remember shutdown? So I was starting to say that this was a community service that happened because whatchamacallit, quarantine happened, and we couldn't meet in public together and live and in person. So I opened up a Zoom room. It's other people's suggestion. I didn't actually have the brilliant idea myself. Other people told me to do it. And we started getting together on Fridays, and I started having guests come in and talk about stuff. And I noticed something interesting. First of all, I noticed that there were 30 to 50 people every week that came into this meeting, which was like crazy to me. But even crazier was we started getting people from around the world. Definitely around the country, definitely Canada, but we also got like UK and Australia and Malaysia and Singapore, and suddenly we became global. I guess we're global, and I don't want to give that up. So we're continuing to do this. It's still a community service, and we still welcome anybody who wants to come in here for free. But we do ask people to support us if they can. I'll talk about that a little later. So our conversations have sort of morphed and changed and I don't know, shape shifted over the last 5 years. Right now, we're still dealing with a post-COVID culture and environment and community. There are still vestiges, and there's still things that sort of happened that we're still dealing with. One of them, I'm actually talking about in a couple of weeks. We're going to have people talking about the trouble that we're having with the commercial theater is happening right now, and the possibility that I don't know. The New York Times wrote two articles that said that the American musical is like doomed. That might be an overstatement, but we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about the effect that shutdown had on commercial theater. But today we're actually going to talk about something near and dear to me. Some of us call it indie theater. Not everybody calls it indie theater. For 20 years, we've been trying to get everybody to call it indie theater, but still, some people still call it showcase, off-off-Broadway. Off-off-Broadway is actually the thing that we're trying to get away from. We're trying to make the theater that happens in small theaters around New York and around the country, give them their own identity, not compare them to Broadway. It's not that it's off-off-Broadway, it's in indie. So we're going to talk about that today with one person who I've known a long time. Guy's been on the show many times, and new to me is Bree O'Connor. And we're going to talk about what the indie theater scene is like right now, and what we can do to ensure its future. There's different ways of looking at this. I'm actually going to I'm going to bring Guy on, and I want him to sort of tell me why it is that. Here you go. So, Guy, I wanted to. Why is it that I knew that you wanted to do this. You wanted to talk about this. You saw an urgency in talking about this right now. So, I've never said your name out loud. Yedwab?
You got it in one.
Okay, so it's Guy Yed. It's Guy. No, it's Guy Yedwab. Um, I've known you always as being part of LIT, League of Independent Theaters. Um, Now you're kind of in a transitional period. I think it has something to do with your family, if I remember correctly. You need you.
Yeah, so I joined the League of Independent Theater as its first student member in 2009. Those heady days when theater was in crisis, if everyone remembers that ancient part of history that has nothing to bear on today.
Well, no, it was
Um,
the 209, the 2009 crisis. We also had the 2010, the 2011, the 2012. I think
yeah.
we're up to the 2025 crisis, right?
Yes. No, it is interesting how on the one hand, the world continues to pressure down, but also we're still here. We're still doing it. But yes, I've been the most recently the president of the board of the League of Independent Theater, which I'll talk a little bit more about. And I've sort of been transitioning the
Did it
organization
again.
to some new leadership because I now have four kids and am also a licensed attorney, and so there's only so much blood can be wrung from this stone. But I actually, when I went to law school in 2019, I told the league that I was stepping down, barring any unforeseen circumstances
I
that
don't
might
know
come
any.
the next year.
I don't know anybody who's been stepping down for as long as you have.
I wish I could quit you into indie theater. Uh,
So let me bring on Bree, and let's meet Bree as well, and then we're going to talk about um, we'll talk about indie theater and the general topic for today. So Bree, we've never met before. Hello.
Hello. It's nice to actually meet you. Your reputation precedes you.
Oh, well, I hope that's a good thing.
Usually when people tell you it is, it is.
Oh, I've used it out of context for some. Your reputation precedes you. Oh my God. So tell us a little bit about your company, and then we're going to transition into LIT.
Sure. So I am the founder and producing artistic director for Playful Substance. We are a developmental theater company, and we have been in and around New York almost invisibly since 2007. Mostly small venues, so that is the meat of what I do. I run writers groups for playwrights and screenwriters, and I've recently started a memoir program. And essentially, everything revolves around the work that comes out of the writers group. We bring in our community of actors for developmental work, and we work and work and work until we have something that's ready to share.
So I'm going to bring a guy back. So let's talk a little bit about um, the the beginnings of League of Independent Theaters, and what what you offer people. I want people to know a little bit about League, and then we're going to move to indie theater. We're going to talk about what you wanted to talk about today, which is we got to hold on to indie theater, essentially. I mean, in a
yeah.
nutshell.
Yeah, I
Um,
think to talk about sort of where the league comes from, I think actually jumps off from that point you were talking before about us wanting to call it independent theater. And my point about when I got started was just after the financial crisis, which was not long after the league itself was founded. At the time, given the big upheaval in the financial sector that was then, trickling downstream to, everyone, a lot of venues that work was being produced in were going out of business. Particularly, there was
and
the
let's let's repeat that. This is 2009.
yes,
Because
this is
otherwise people could think you're talking about
Yeah, no,
2025.
it's especially because my next sentence was going to be the Ohio Theater then closed, which, if everyone remembers, the original Ohio Theater closed after the financial crisis. The new Ohio Theater closed in the last couple of years. So history has a way of rhyming in that way. But what happened after the Ohio originally closed back in 2008 or 2009 was there was a big town hall, a bunch of people got together and were like, this is the state of the world, much as we're going to do continuing. And then an elected official was basically like, well, I can tell you how we address things in our world is you come up with a list of demands, you go to people with power, and you make them promise you that they're gonna give you those things that you need, and then you hold them accountable if they don't. And we were all like, "Oh, that's an interesting, different strategy." Not like write plays about it, which I love and is an important part of doing the work. But the league was specifically created to address that component, which is advocating for what this community needs. Um, Part of that was also defining what we mean when we mean this community. So you mentioned independent theater. Just, there's people here from outside the city, as you said, people who may not be familiar with what exactly we mean when we're talking about that. We're talking about work that is being produced and the people who work in 99 seat or less theaters or outside of traditional spaces, which when we started, it was all about 99 seat or less theaters, right? The black boxes of 50 or 65 seats or whatever. But increasingly, it's also people who are doing site-specific work at down at South Street Seaport on the pier or, whatever the spaces that people are finding. That's what we're talking about. Some people see that.
And can I just say that
Yeah.
I think it's fair to include small theater companies that are doing work around the country. It's not just in New York.
Yes.
I think
Yeah.
in New York. New York has defined it. I'm going to actually come on and join you. So New York actually defines it because New York is the home of equity, and Actors Equity kind of defines most of the contracts that we do in theater. So equity basically set it up once upon a time. I don't know when this happened, but once upon a time they decided that Broadway was anything that was 500 seats or more. Off-Broadway was 100 seats to 499 seats, and then anything under 99 seats or fewer, was considered. At that point, the term was off-off-Broadway. It's not that equity called it that. It's just that we didn't know what else to call it. So, off-off-Broadway was born as the theater size. Really,
Yeah.
it's just so you take it from there.
Yeah. And I think that the fact that it sort of came of that thing, which is a size, right, which isn't actually a description of theater in any way other than the physical space, means that it means different things to different people. Some people view it and it is a development ground, right? They're going to go and use it as a springboard to create something that goes to, a commercial theater or tours the country. There's also theaters that are sustainably living and surviving, just creating work for that community and within that community, like a Jack in Brooklyn, for example, or places on East Fourth Street that they're not creating work for the aspiration of taking it somewhere else. It's its own home for a different kind of intimate event. The term community theater gets put around. I personally view that as theater that is built around the act of participating, right? Like the important part of it is that the community gets to participate, and that's why we call it community theater as opposed to something else. People can have as many different views about that as possible. But just to say that we're really looking at a big tent of a lot of people who are trying to do different things. What they have in common is the challenges, which is that usually it's a pretty good track of budget size, right? You're talking about individual artists, companies, and venues that are not well-heeled, that are not usually not, supported by large foundations, that are usually have to be very responsive and very nimble because they are not very far from the edge of things. And so, the kinds of things.
I just want to say that is basically what I created TRU to serve originally. I mean, 33 years ago, 34 years ago, those were the companies. That was the size of production that we were geared to support. It's changed over the years. We now have people on all levels of theater, from indie, off-Broadway and showcase to commercial. So we got bigger, but we're still trying to help everybody.
Yeah.
Which isn't always the
Yeah.
healthiest thing to say, but yeah, I think we're still trying to help everybody.
Yeah. I mean, there's no reason
Bree,
not to try.
let me move to you for a second. What is your connection with League of Independent Theaters, and when did you first when were you first aware of them? Lit.
I've known of Lit for years, as I have been their candidate recommendations that they put out every voting season. I
did want to explain something to everybody. You talked about advocacy. In order to be an advocacy not-for-profit, you have to have a very specific designation. We are a 501c3, and sort of baked into that is the idea that we can't be an advocacy group. So you guys have a different designation. Can you explain that quickly?
Yeah, I can touch on that very quickly. So 501c3 is what nonprofit arts organizations and community organizations are. They can give you tax incentives to donate to them. In return, they're not supposed to be lobbying, which is specifically getting people elected and passing legislation. Obviously, you can talk about social issues, but you can't say vote for insert mayoral candidate here. The league is a 501c6, which actually makes us essentially a chamber of commerce or a trade organization. So just in the same way that, the Chamber of Commerce can, represent the businesses that are a part of them, or, a union of, I think even possibly the Broadway League and other of those leagues may be 501c6s as well. That gives us the ability to directly lobby for legislation and to get candidates elected.
Which brings us back to Bree. So explain what your job was, what your connection was. Not a job; it was a connection. It was how you interacted.
I mean, that was how I first became aware of Lit, was through the political connection. And then somehow I ended up on committees for the New York Independent Theater.
Somehow you wound up on committees. Then That's what happens when you connect to a not-for-profit. You wind up on committees.
I got on committees. And then recently, in the last several months, when there was, high board turnover at Lit, there was a call that went out for more new members, and I went, yeah, sure. So I've been, along with Rosemary, attending these meetings and trying to get up to speed.
Well, let's get up to speed. Do we want to do more history? Yeah, I think we should still do history because I'm not sure that what Guy. Let me ask you this: why?
Could I pitch you this? Pitch you this, Bob? Yeah. Can I explain what we do through a bit of history of how we've done it?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I talked about political advocacy, and so one of the things that we've done. Most election cycles, we're sort of retooling right now, but we'll be back at it, is a Meet the Candidates event where we invited primarily at the time city council, because those are the people who show up and they make a big difference in New York City. But we've done other offices as well. We make them make promises about specific things that they would do to help the arts, and then we endorse the ones that convince our membership that they're looking out for us. So, for example, we have been pushing for a long time for universal health care in New York City, because especially independent artists who, it is tricky to find, and Republicans nationally want to make it even more tricky to get access to reliable health care. There's a law that has been kicked around in New York State that would be a single payer healthcare system for everyone, right? So that's the sort of thing that we would say, do you support this? Yes or no on a bunch of those things. And then we endorse those candidates, much like a lot of other political organizations do. We did that for many years. We also pushed for legislation. So one of the big successes that Amy Todoroff, who was the executive director of the league for a period of time, during the pandemic, she worked with city council on the legislation called Open Culture that allowed for for New York City, much more accessible public performance permits. So rather than having to deal with the permits that basically were designed for street fairs and were absolutely atrocious, it was a very quick way for people to be able to try and take work outside, especially during that peak period where we couldn't do work inside.
I remember we had Carla Hoke Miller on from
Yes.
mayor's office, and she talked about the fact that they personally wanted to uh, increase the opportunities for theater to happen during shutdown, and
Yes.
street theater was the obvious answer.
Right. Yeah, especially, long before vaccination was ubiquitous and we knew what was going on. There was a period where that was the only way. But it also had knock-on effects for later. I mean, the idea that people should be able to find easy access to perform outside is not just doesn't have to be a COVID emergency thing, right? So those were the kinds of things that we have been working on in terms of the
Can I
political
ask you?
sphere.
Could you include storefront performances as well in that, or was that a whole separate thing?
So, in terms of the performing during the open culture program, it was specifically the street. I think there was some work to try and allow people to perform directly outside of their own properties that got stalled, and I think is still being worked on. The reason why it is helpful to have an organization like the League working on this is because once you actually get into it, it turns out that like behind the scenes, the political world, they have their own language of things. So in my head, I'm like, oh, the difference between the street itself that the Department of Transportation, monitors and the sidewalks, which this other agency is responsible for, that's the stuff that we have to get into the weeds on when we're advocating. But yes, I think that in general, more ability to access performance outside is something that we've always been advocating for. Um,
Well, I was just adding to the conversation the fact that I know during shutdown, one of the things that Carla uh, was talking about was storefront, um, basically buildings that weren't being used. It's the Shishama thing. It's
oh
basically
yes,
it's the Shishama and Anita Durst thing where people were trying to create performance opportunities in abandoned storefronts, and they're still doing it. Shishama still does that, but it may be a little different than the licenses that you guys were dealing with getting, or a lot different.
yeah. Yeah, in reality, the specifics of this or that program get to be somewhat complicated. But yeah, I think that those were all things that we're working on. And the mayor's office of media and entertainment, which Carla was very good partners with us over the years. Um,
So the other thing about the history that I wanted to say was I, I still I still want to push the idea of indie theater. Essentially, what we're saying earlier was that off things were known as off-off-Broadway theater. Things are within off-off-Broadway theater are showcases, there are festivals, there are all sorts of small performances that take place in spaces that are 99 seats or fewer. And we wanted to brand it as something that was unique and had an energy of its own. And I think Martin Denton was the one who birthed it. And Denton wanted us to refer to things as indie theater. Here we are, like 15 years later, and the branding hasn't yet stuck. But I think that there's still hope. Can you talk about that a little bit? Well, Bree, let's get your position because you run a small theater company and you have a different perspective?
I mean, I absolutely prefer indie because I feel like being branded as Broadway's, younger step sibling is akin to calling what I do off TV. Um, we just don't do the same thing. The expectations need to be different. So I feel like pushing the branding, especially in terms of like public facing conversations, is indie theater is something else. You can't come to indie theater, which is, generally much smaller resources, and expect the spectacle of, of the Lion King. That's not what's happening down here. What's happening down here is something different. And indie, I mean, we have indie film, and people know what indie film is, and understand that, indie film encapsulates
With a little crossover here and there, but yes.
Yeah, I mean, it's we are funding for the most part our own work. It's independent.
It is independent, and it's got an energy and an identity of its own. Although it doesn't have a single identity, obviously, because let's talk about the numbers, because you actually have figures that you can use to support this. Let's compare how much indie theater is produced compared to how much commercial theater is produced, or at least let's give people an idea of how much indie theater happens in New York. I think your figures are really New York based.
Yeah. Yeah, so you just mentioned a couple of moments ago, Carla, and the Mayor's Office of Media and Entertainment. So we worked with them to push them to do a economic impact study on independent and small venue theater. In the way that politics does, they wound up sweeping some off-Broadway into it, but it still has a lot of interesting numbers for our community specifically. And so one of the things that they listed, so one of the tricky parts of this, which I'll circle back to at the end, is that this was a 2019 survey. So again, the timings on this,
Wiped out in 6 months.
it creates an interesting snapshot that we would love to go and contrast, or find out more about what's changed since then. But apparently, but basically in 2019, there were 748 small venue theater companies in New York City, which even for me, knowing that there's a lot of independent theater going on in this town, I still get floored every time I see that number. There's a lot of people doing theater.
And some of them are doing more than one production.
Yes, absolutely.
So we're talking about a thousand or more independent small productions that were happening.
Yes, absolutely. And so, they did some modeling to basically see, okay, what are people spending when they go to these theaters? What are they spending when they go to the bodega directly after a show? And also, what are people being paid to, for the resources? And they said that overall, this independent theater in New York generated 1.3 billion in economic output and about 8,400 full-time equivalent jobs, which is, given how many people in our sector are not working full-time jobs, that actually means that's probably a lot more individual humans being employed. But I mean, the the point of doing a study like this is a lot of our job is to explain to people who don't know much about indie theater, some of whom are elected officials or foundations, what exactly our world is like. And so it's a different conversation to say, look, this is a $1.3 billion industry on its own. There's people who are buying, every dollar that you guys are spending at Home Depot to get your plywood so that you can throw up a flat in the back is economic activity that the city benefits from. And the fact that it's happening sort of diffuse across the city makes it a little bit harder to see, but actually is part of the strength of it.
I guess if you do some like quick mental math, and you know that the showcases base might spend like a couple $1,000s on materials to build their sets and everything, and then you multiply it by the number of shows that are done, which is 1,000. You start seeing there are significant numbers happening here. Yeah, so it's interesting to break it down. Um,
Yeah.
are there any more specifics in the report that you can pull out?
Um, there were 97 producing or presenting theaters that had a physical location, which I thought was interesting. So in terms of venues, that's what was there. The wages themselves was 512 million, which is it's just so nice that it's like just an even a half billion in estimated wages that are being paid. Which again, to your point about our budgets, people are being given stipends, not huge salaries in many of these things. So to add up to 512 million in wages, it means there's a lot that's going on here.
That's
Um,
astonishing, actually. That's great. I'm gonna carry that in my back pocket with me. I like that.
Yeah, it's interesting because it really mirrors if you look because I've done this kind of advocacy just at small business research in general. Half of the businesses in America are small businesses, which are defined as like 10 employees or less. So you see this generally that the small grassroots startup, not startup in the sense of having a $1 billion funding from some venture capital startups like I wanted to start a taco stand on my corner, that's half of the economy. And even though on as individuals it is hard to necessarily have that power, it points to the fact that together it is something that can't be ignored. The New York Innovative Theater Foundation, which used to run the NYIT Awards, did a study back in like 2005, I think, that showed that they counted 80,000 independent theater workers and also calculated that 80% of them vote in local elections, that's a number you should keep in your back pocket because every time I tell that to an elected official, that's a conversation. I remember one of the first political events we went to, the woman who at the time was city council member for Chinatown and Lower Manhattan, we invited her to the Meet the Candidates event. And she was like, "Oh, will voters be there or just artists?" And I was like, "Excuse me? Let me tell you a little bit something about who your voters are." Yeah, I think I think that
Don't ever tell me.
realizing that
Don't ever tell me who that was.
no one needs to know. She can go into the dustbin of history. We don't need to worry with her anymore. She is not actively representing anyone right now, so I'm happy to let that go away. Um,
Oh, I see a question, by the way. Are actors who perform in indie venues a mix of equity and non-equity, or primarily non-equity? They're definitely a mix because we're talking about
yeah.
showcases. I mean, showcases. The equity showcase is a very big part of this whole thing that we're talking about. This indie theater thing we're talking about. And, um, did you want to say something, Bree?
Oh, yeah. I mean, we do almost exclusively showcases. And if we remember a few years back during COVID, where Equity opened its doors to everyone,
Yes.
suddenly the actors that we worked with regularly were all of a sudden Equity. So we've done showcases for years, but that was a huge shift from doing one Equity showcase a year to everything we do had to be through Equity.
And the explanation to anybody who doesn't know that in the room is if you have one equity actor in your cast, then you have to use the equity agreements that are involved in whatever level that you're producing. And there, there's nothing, there's nothing awful about the equity agreements. They all are pretty fair, and they really all boil down to treat your actors well and respectfully. Um, but there are times when it is easier to do a show with non-equity casts. Just to be completely honest about it, there are times when it's just easier. Um,
Yeah, one of the things that we also were engaged in for many years was attempting outreach with Equity to give feedback on the showcase. Not very much was represented. There's still, and I think my perspective has been the component of the showcase code, which is ensuring the actor's safety, ensuring that there's rules of time and right? Like you can't schedule an 18-hour day on someone who you're only paying $50 in a Metro card. Like that stuff is a no-brainer and like really should be incorporated. Whether or not you're actually doing an equity, you should just use equity as the standard.
Yeah,
Then there's
there's
things
nothing
like,
onerous. There's nothing onerous about what they're asking you to do. There are venues that you can't use because you have to use an equity approved venue. Um, there used to be a limit on ticket price. Equity stopped that. Basically, you can charge whatever you think you can get away with.
yeah,
I don't know if you're going to pay $1,000 for Washington in Othello, then possibly $60 for a showcase seems like a bargain. I don't know.
right.
Well,
And
that's the thing.
also, having been part of that specific conversation, there's also just inflation. It used to be written in that $15 was the cap. I think it was 15. And from the 1990s to 2010, $15 for a ticket doesn't mean the same thing anymore.
Yeah.
So when it was removed, most companies I saw were like, we can do 25 now. Like, woo! That's almost doubling your ticket price. And also, it's
I've seen some people jump to 60, and I go, how are you going to get away with it? It's,
yeah,
but
I mean,
yeah,
it's definitely a juggle because all of our costs outside of talent have gone up, and those costs are non-negotiable. The space is not negotiable. You have to pay your box office staff. You have to, there's so many costs that are like these people just get paid. And unfortunately, it tends to be what's left for the actor, and that's kind of the complicated dance that we're doing with ticket prices all the time. But I think what I see that's interesting that a lot of companies are doing are tiered pricing that educates the audience about the real price of their ticket and what they have to pay to get in. Which I think is a really, I'm curious to see how audiences are who are not in the industry are receiving those ticket menus.
can
If
I
you
can
see
yeah,
can I take a question now, yeah, Jeff, what's
yeah.
your
Let's go for
question?
it.
I have a twofold question. First off, would either of your guests like to address the use of community college theater programs and hybrid productions, um, which also bring in audiences as well. And then the other part of my question is, do you think that live streaming, especially for independent theater, do you think there's an avenue there that can bring in revenue and widen your exposure, et cetera?
Yeah.
Complicated questions. Both of them are very complicated.
I'm sorry,
Yeah.
Bob.
I'll start with the hybrid community college question, and I'm also going to loop in the question that I saw from Sue in the chat about how productions make money, or that's a huge difficult question that most companies struggle with. But I will say that partnerships are a big part of success. Whether it's partnerships with an institution like a community college. One of the things that the league looked at for a long time was, space is at a premium. So where are there space that's not being used that we could unlock, right? So one thing I discovered when we were trying to host events is that a lot of schools have stages that are empty outside of school hours. Now, they are protective of their space because they want to make sure that it's available for their students. But we wound up piloting a program where basically theaters could use their space as rehearsal space for free in exchange for providing theater workshops for students. And so, it's again, one of the biggest line items in your budget is going to be space. And so, if you can find a partnership that cuts out that cost, and to Bree's point about what's left over goes to the artists, I think that those are no brainers. It's also about, to your point, expanding audience. There's a theater festival called Big Green Theater that is out in Bushwick. They partner public school students with scientists to create short plays about climate change or about recycling or things like that. And that too creates a community, creates a it puts their theater company in connection with the public school community and the academic community to really break out into something that has more of that opportunity, to both give something that's valuable and important to the people who are participating, as well as give it a broader reach. So I don't have exactly a silver bullet of like, this is how you do it. These are the people that are out there. But I think that those kinds of partnerships is really just critical to doing the kind of work that we do.
I guess somebody needs to say it, but at the level of producing that we're all talking about, it's really hard to break even, especially if you're talking about showcases. Equity limits what you can spend on a showcase, which is kind of hilarious, because they basically say that your budget cannot be more than $35,000, and then they say, but on top of that, you don't have to count your actor salaries, and you don't have to count your venue, which are the two biggest costs.
That second part was something that we fought for, because prior to that, there were shows where you're like, my rehearsal space and my theater venue is going to cost more than 35,000. So either I have to do all the rehearsals in a month or less, or do the first stage of rehearsing in John's bedroom before we can, so yeah, it is funny that it now exempts the two biggest costs out of the budget, but
but what's also ironic about it is that it's, in general, it just means that you can lose more money than you could have lost before.
Yeah.
So if you do the math, if you know that you're limited to a theater that's 99 seats or fewer, and if you know that equity is basically saying that you can do 12 performances and extend it to 16. So you figure out the math in 16 performances at 99 seats, figuring in the fact that you're going to have to comp a lot of equity people, because equity requires that you comp your equity people that come to the door and show their card, and you're going to comp your critics, and there's going to be a certain degree of comping. There's going to be some percentage of comping. If you do the math, you'll find that it's very unlikely that you will break even. But some people do, and I'm not going to say that it doesn't happen. It does happen, but it's
I will add, and maybe Bree will chime in on this as well. I think the biggest reason why people don't do the showcase code is precisely that limit on number of performance and weeks of performance. Because I know a theater company that did a performance once a month, once a week every Friday night. But they could run it, because it wasn't equity, they could run it for 2-3 months. They wound up being able to generate more word of mouth, get more word out there, and fill more of those performances, rather than jamming everything into 2 weeks and having trouble getting off the ground on that one.
To
sorry,
piggyback on what you're saying, the other thing is that you have to know for showcases that the rehearsal and the performances need to take place within 5 weeks.
Yep.
So you have 16 performances that you can run, and those have to be in either the third, fourth, and fifth, or the fourth and fifth weeks, because you need the first couple weeks to actually rehearse. So it's not a very good economic model, but it's also there are reasons for it, and there's some understandable reasons for it.
Oh, the pluses for it are that it gives it gives an opportunity to new playwrights to with minimal risk for the playwright and for the company to put forth these shows. Without the showcase code, that is that's a difficult investment to make. So I think it really does promote the writers more than anything.
Yes. I mean, basically, I don't discourage anybody from getting the work up in a showcase, and I don't discourage anybody from using the equity showcase code if you can make it work for you. But the other thing is, you have to be clear about what your goal is. If your goal in doing a showcase is to make money, go into a different business. It's not going to happen, likely. You're not going to make a living doing showcase theater. Let's come back to the topic, the main topic. We are still in recovery. Okay, what is you gave us the pre-COVID statistics. So let's talk about what happened since that report came out.
So,
silence, a deadly silence.
No. I mean, it is a big question. We still have less data on that, which is why one of the things the league would like to push for is some more surveying and research into this. Um, so, what I would say that, there have been theaters that have closed. There have also been theaters that have opened. There have been people who've been displaced. I know a lot of people who just got pushed out of the city, period. I would say that to me, the thing that most catches my eye is that because this is such a scrappy community, shared resources are really, really critical. So to talk about a couple that have really fallen apart, there used to be a website called Space Finder, if everyone remembers it, which was a search engine for every rehearsal space and performance space in the city, give or take. And so uh, the question of, is there a place that I can on a Friday night get $15 an hour to get my cast together is just a bigger headache now than it was before. You know, NewYorkTheater.com that Martin Denton ran that closed in 2014. They used to review like dang near every show in independent theater, and now most places are cutting. It used to be that Time Out New York would cover a lot of stuff. They're not out there reviewing every dang show under the sun anymore.
Do you know that you're answering a question from somebody in the chat? Did you know you're doing that?
Maybe there was a little bit of keeping my eye on the chat there.
Okay.
Thanks, Susan. But yeah, I think that all of these things that used to be the New York Innovative Theater Awards. It went away during the pandemic. The league has been working. We did the last couple of years bring it back. We're sort of retooling it because of some staff turnover. But we weren't able to do it on the same scale of having people show up to review every show and give, awards for production and design and all of that stuff. And so I really worry because it puts more of the cost and more of the risk on individual artists to try and figure this out. Where, I like TRU is a great example of how, and the fact that this persisted and is still a space that people can come together, you're connecting so that people know where they can find other people who can work with them. You're providing these shared resources that I think is really critical for being able to be successful, in this community. Um, um, sorry, I just saw the question from Elizabeth about do we really want reviews? I did have a reviewer come to a show of mine back when I ran a theater company, and he walked out at the end and didn't write a review. And it is the kindest thing. It's the kindest thing that a reviewer has ever done. It was a comedy, and I was like, why tonight of all nights, not a single joke work? I don't understand. It was so funny every other night. And so he went home, and I was like, he didn't write about it. That's the nicest thing he could do. Yeah, I mean, I think the question, like I said about how different people are trying to do different things in this space. I think there are companies that are putting fully staged performances that they're really trying to have as be the primary work. And if the New York Times comes and sees that and says, "Look, this is the next big thing," like I think it can have a huge positive. Yes, I had a friend who was at the Under the Radar Theater, and the New York Times said some things in Brooklyn should stay in Brooklyn. You know, like that is the risk that you run when you do what we do. But I think overall, at least the theoretical ability for someone to be able to come in and say, you know, there's a thing happening here. You won't have heard about the puppetry festival in here, especially for the people who aren't diehard indie theater people. There's people around the city who might go and see a $40 show in their neighborhood that's interesting and speaks to things that they're not going to hear about it. They'll just see the billboards for chess or but Glenn Ross with Bob Odenkirk in it, and that's what they'll know is happening.
Um, did we cover the different aspects of what indie theater encompasses? We talked. I know I got caught up on showcases, but it's not just really showcases. There are other levels of production that people can do that would still qualify as indie. Help me on that. I'm not coming up with the right words right now. I don't know what to call. What do you call small production? We used to call them workshops. Equity doesn't let us call things work. Well, they don't let us because of what equity defines a workshop is. It's kind of misleading to call something a workshop. A workshop, which we usually think is just like a sort of like seat of our pants kind of putting together a process in which you're working on a new show. A workshop actually winds up meaning something that costs $250,000 or more in equity terms.
Yeah.
So, what do you
Yeah, I
call
think
it?
maybe I think you could either call it developmental or some of those companies identify as incubators. We've lost, that's another common thing that we've lost some of. There are definitely still many incubating, right, where the mission of it is to develop a writer's work. There used to be down where Richard Foreman had his theater company, there was the Incubator Arts Project, was it called? Or the Writers Project. And I'm like half remembering names from a decade ago. But basically, these were companies whose job it was to help. I mean, sort of the people who are in this true community, right? You've got a baby of a play. There's the next step that it needs to take where people speak it aloud and you can see what works and what doesn't. And there are companies that focus just on that. On hey, how do we get you from this is just something that you're doing yourself and maybe getting some people together to stage. What if we gave you a small budget and a small audience of people who really must be diehards because they're wanting to come out on a Friday night to see something that's not done yet. But that kind of developmental incubator space, I think those are also under pressure because it's hard to keep this stuff together. But there are the Fire Next Time Playwright Festival, for example, that it does annual short theater festivals of Black and people of color playwrights, right? Like bringing those voices, giving them a space, putting it up so that people can see it and take the next step in their development is another part of independent theater.
I wanted to come back to something that Jeff asked. He was talking about he was trying to put together the idea of community theater um, and independent theater. So my question to you: do you think that independent theater has an aesthetic? Are there any limitations to what you would consider being independent theater?
What
And
do you think, Bruce?
the other side of that is basically community theater has its own identity. So I don't know why it would need to have an independent indie theater identity because it has its own.
I mean, yes. I mean, but I would say, from my perspective, I have, Playful Substance is a bit of a hybrid between community theater and, and indie theater. We don't audition. We don't, we don't screen people. It's whoever really wants to show up to come and play is invited to come and play. Now, what that means in practice, though, is that we do have a rigorous practice. And so people tend to be like, oh, this is more than I bargained for. I don't know if I'm ready to write a whole play, or I don't know if I'm ready to chew on some work that's this raw and this new. It's not work that's for everybody, but everyone's invited to join. And so we have a nice mix of professionals and hobbyists, people who are like not quitting their day job, but I think that fits into the community model. But it's not a traditional community theater. It's a roundabout way of answering your question is I think indie has a very broad, it's a very broad brush that you're painting with.
Okay, and I'm going to lose you in 3 minutes, but quickly, the audience experience. What is it that we're trying to communicate to the audience about what their experience will be? If we're going to call it indie theater, it's basically branding and marketing, and so it's something for an audience to understand. What would their expectations be?
Yeah, I'll touch on that, and also, I think that what the audience should be expecting is that they don't have the same expectation in terms of, money that poured into it and X and Y, but what they can is the intimacy, right? W- We are largely looking at independent theater from a perspective of it's right there. The actor is not going to be far from you. You're going to be feeling you're deep in the middle of it. And for people for whom that intimacy, that up closeness, feeling like you're part of something, that you have a really strong relationship with the performance and the people in it, that is the thing that is going to be unique. What else that means? I mean, some is really rough, some is really, improvised. Some of it is just as, slick and produced as bigger work in larger theaters. From an aesthetic perspective, it could mean anything, but I think intimacy is that thing that is unique, right? Intimacy and accessibility too, I think also, because we're not going to charge you. There's no one in the space that's going to charge you $200 so that you can see, whomever you want to see. It's more likely to be accessible in your neighborhood. It's more likely to be accessible there. And to me, you can divide up that community in many different ways, and there's things that are in favor of that. From an advocacy perspective, having a broad term that fits everyone is useful for when we're advocating for the needs that impact everyone, like the cost of space, like healthcare, like having an affordable place to live. Because the difference between a community theater or an educational theater or an experimental theater or a developmental theater, all terms that have useful and interesting definitions, the things that bind us together is that we're trying to do something intimate and connect directly to our audience and our community, and we have some needs that are in common based on how this work gets made and how we live our lives.
Well, that was great. Thank you. I can I continue with you, Guy, or if I?
Unfortunately, I have some childcare responsibilities
Okay,
that I need to get to.
I am really heartbroken to end this because I think there's so much more to talk about. But I want to thank you both for being with me. I know that you have lives to live, so I release you with love and go be free. I'm going to say a few words to the YouTube audience. I want to thank the community for being with me today, for coming. Um, I hope I know that not everything I'm going to do in 280 consecutive weeks is going to be of interest to everybody, but I hope that I'm coming up with a broad enough spectrum of topics that most of you are engaged, and some of you find individual things that you want to come and hear us talk about. I have some interesting things coming up. I'm going to talk about those in a moment, but I'm going to let you guys go, and I'm going to say some final words on YouTube.
Thank you so much, Bob. This has been really a fantastic event.
Oh,
Thank you, Bob.
I wish we had more time. There's so much more to talk about. So I'm gonna basically take the spotlight back, and you guys can either stay or not, depending on how I think they both left. Okay, so YouTube people, I'm here. We've just had an hour conversation with two people and talked about indie theater. Next week, I go from India to India because next week I have an actress an artist who was born and raised in India. We're going to be talking about the cultural differences between the theater and art in India versus here. A couple weeks later, I've got some people that are going to be talking about the American musical and how it's surviving in spite of the economy that is just being brutal to it right now. Then after that, we're going to be talking about when a writer can write about experiences and about people that aren't the same as their experiences and the people that they were born and raised with. When can you cross the cultural line? A conversation I've been wanting to have a long time. It's a very difficult conversation, but there are some answers for those of you who are hoping to write about things that are other than your own backgrounds. So if you find this interesting, YouTubers, and you want to actually be invited and be in the room and actually ask questions and then maybe interact with other people in the community and even interact with the panelists, I can make that happen. Just email me. My email is trunltd@aol.com. That's trunltd@aol.com. We'll put you on the list and we'll send you the Zoom link every week. We do this for free. I said this at the beginning. We do this for free. It's a community service. There's a reality that coexists with that, and that's that we have bills to pay, especially now that we've returned to a lot of live performance, and we've returned to things that are a lot closer to what they used to be pre-COVID. So there's a lot more expenses. Speaking of which, I don't know if you noticed, but everything's gotten more expensive, and tariffs are not helping. But nevertheless, we have to find ways of paying our bills. So if you want to support us, you can go to trudonate.com, trudonate.com. Or you could join us as a member. You can become a true member. That's very helpful. Then we won't even expect you or ask you to pay anything when you come to these meetings. And you can also just pay for the meeting. I think we charge $12 as a basic admission price for this. That's it. I hope to see you in the weeks to come. I hope now that you found TRU, you'll stay true, and we'll see you in the weeks to come. And hey, email me and tell me about any kind of topic that you think I'm not covering that you want to talk about. I'll talk about anything. I'll talk about anything with anyone. So just let me know. As long as it's theater related. Let's specify that. Okay. Thanks, everyone.